Okay, hello everybody being here. I'm very glad to be moderating this debate. And thank you for being here. And thank you also for everybody who's watching on Facebook Live this debate from everywhere in the world through internet. I can hear an echo. I hope you don't hear that. No, that's okay? Okay. So we have this very interesting debate today, this panel organized by Fairtrade International and in partnership with Vox Europe. I'm the director and co-founder of Vox Europe, and we published an op-ed that I'm suggesting you to read on Vox Europe on the very subject we are about to talk about. The subject today is how global food systems are creating a sustainable tomorrow. We're of course going to talk about the impacts of climate change on the products that we consume, and especially what we think and you think governments and companies can do to make supply chains greener and quicker. Because in the eve of the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which is going to be between the 7th and to the 18th of November, so tomorrow. And the Montreal Biodiversity Conference, which will be held from the 7th of December, addressing biodiversity loss. We are really in a state of statu quo, in a state of urging decisions to be taken as we see the COP27 is a year after last year's COP26 in Glasgow, and very little has been achieved. So time is pressing. We can have the feeling and a lot of frustrations for things not really moving on. And we are going to ask our panelists what they think should be done, especially by companies and especially by governments, and why things are not moving on faster. So I'm very happy to introduce our four panelists today. So here is Deborah Osei Mensah. You are operations manager at Asufano Cocoa Farmers, and you're also Fairtrade Youth Ambassador, and you came especially from Ghana to talk about the farmers and producers of cocoa in Ghana and their situations today. So I will ask you a question, but I'll just first introduce the other panelists. Paul Schoenmakers, I hope I pronounced your name properly, at Tony's Chocolonely. So you are responsible for this company producing cocoa in a fair trade way, sustaining farmers, and you will explain how you work and how you manage to produce this fair trade production through your company. Xavier Rombouts, you are responsible for a family cooperative of producer, fair trade producer, fighting actively against deforestation and also fighting against drug trade. So in a way, yeah, in your program, but I thought it was interesting to state it straight away. And Sophie Aujean, you are Director of Advocacy for Fairtrade International. You recently arrived, so as you explained to me, and we will hear you after having listened to everybody to explain the Fairtrade International advocacy on the situation today that we are addressing. The most affected, who are the most affected by climate change, and what's your position on this matter? So, Deborah, I will start with you. You were explaining to me when we prepared this debate that farmers are really not getting enough to feed their families. So, what is the situation that you're seeing every day? And aren't you frustrated by the lack of action from governments and from companies also? Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. On issues of challenges farmers face every day, we start with climate. I always say some time ago, some years back, issues of climate impact was more like a dream to us. But we wake up every day and then we see the impact, and you feel maybe the next year will be better, but the next year gets worse. And so some of the challenges farmers are facing currently with respect to climate change is low yield due to disease infestation, due to disease pests, and then flooding, excessive heat, and other things. So during the major harvest, which is from this month, October to January, where about 10 years ago, there's moderate rainfall, there's good heat and other things to support plant growth. Currently, we are not seeing it that way. And so you realize at the end of the season, the yield that farmers are supposed to get, it's been reduced. And then with this, we see it as threatening the livelihood of our farmers, because we depend on our farming. That is our business. That is where we get our income from, for our family, for other expenses. And so if at the end of the season we are not getting enough, then it means a time is coming, we will no longer be in business. And then also we have the risks of sustainability, because with the farming, the way farming systems are, you have to be planting to replace the new ones and other things. But because of the weather condition, it's becoming difficult for the new ones to survive. So in 10 years, if I'm not able to plant new ones, it means my crop is going old, and then the time is coming, I'm no longer producing cocoa. So sustainability is also becoming an issue. And then also we look at the threat of food security. We are producing cocoa, we are bringing it to the global north for tonnage to produce the chocolate for everyone to have a good time. But if you are no longer in business, it means whoever is dependent on chocolate is not also getting it. Not just the cocoa, but any other product, any other crop product. So we also see at the end of the day, if you don't tackle this collaboratively, then food system will also be at risk. And then there's also a threat in youth involvement. I stay with my parents, I'm not seeing them benefiting from their business. Definitely, I will also not take over. We have companies that are doing well, and it becomes like a family line. The father is not there, the child take over. But my farm is not doing well, my child is not seeing any profit. Then how are they going to take over? Yes. And then also the issue of living income, which is also facing farmers. Paying the fair prices for a farmer who do a lot of work in their farm is also now becoming a challenge. So I always say now, it seems more like fair pricing is becoming a privilege more than a right. It's a right for a farmer to receive a fair income or a fair wage for a worker for the work they put into their production. Okay. But now it's becoming a privilege, which is very worrying.
Okay, but are you saying, can you hear me well? No.
Are you seeing the situation deteriorating, or in the last, I would say, the last few years, or not? Is it getting worse? Do you find the farmers' conditions, living conditions, are actually getting worse because of, as you said, climate change and the lack of water? And is it worse than it was, or is it?
Yes, it's not getting better, but it's relative in the sense that we, the Fairtrade certified producers, we have our buyers who are supporting us. So comparatively, our lives are improving daily, but we also look at the mass. We are in a community with other producers. A few of them are part of the Fairtrade production line, with one way or the other, with their own reason. But each and every day, the impact of climate is not getting any smaller. It keeps striking here.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Deborah. So Paul, you used the cocoa to make chocolate, so in a fair trade way. So how do you see the situation from a company point of view? And do you think things getting better, or what are you waiting for, expecting from the COP27, for example?
Thanks. I think it's good to say that the chocolate industry is an extremely wealthy sector. The problem is that wealth is not equally distributed along the value chain. So you have very wealthy large companies at the end of the value chain making a lot of money, and extremely poor cocoa farmers at the beginning that really suffer to make ends meet. And that structural poverty is at the root cause of the issues in cocoa, whether it is illegal labor, child labor or forced labor, or deforestation. Without addressing the issue of poverty, you can't start talking about a sustainable cocoa sector. On top of that, like Deborah said, these cocoa farmers already suffer from the consequences of climate change. So it's not a fantasy or a dream for them. It's a day-to-day reality that they see the crop production go down because of it. Chocolonely exists to change this. We want to, we envision a different kind of chocolate industry, and we do that by following our roadmap, which has 3 pillars. One is creating awareness about the issues in cocoa and what can be done about it. 2 is that we lead by example, showing how you can source cocoa in a different way. And 3 is inspire others to act. We can't change the industry alone, so we need to inspire others to follow our way of working. And what we do is grounded in 5 sourcing principles. First, all the chocolate that we sell is directly traceable to our partner cooperatives. 3 in Ghana, of which Asanafo is one, and 8 in Côte d'Ivoire. And we guarantee that all the chocolate that you buy, that's from Chocolonely, can be traced back to those co-ops. So we know exactly where the cocoa comes from and also what the circumstances are under which that cocoa is produced.
Is it 100%? Is it 100% traceable? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And every year we ask our accountant, PwC, to also check on that. So not just us saying that, it's independently audited claim that we have, and they trace back, they take samples, and then this chocolate bar, can you show us how that worked? It was something that we developed over a couple of years. At the time that we began, the chocolate sector said, well, that's not possible, and it's a ridiculous idea. We proved them wrong, and now you see there's more interest also from the larger players to work on traceability. And for us that's fundamental, because traceability is the start. If you connect it to the problem, then you also feel the responsibility to solve the problem. And then the second source of principle is paying a higher price. So for all the cocoa that we buy, we pay a living income price that helps farmer to enable a living income, to earn a living income. And then we work with cooperatives, because we believe that alone farmers are the weakest link, but together they can be stronger. So we invest in cooperatives like Asanafo and all the others that we work with. So they are stronger, farmer-led organizations that are independent also from larger buyers like we are. And then with them we engage in long-term relationships. These issues are so complicated, you can't tackle just in a season, so you need multiple years horizon also to build trust. And last but not least, through co-ops, we support farmers to improve their way of working, become more professional farmers, increase productivity and quality. And those 5 sourcing principles together help farmers escape poverty. And with that, they are more resilient to also suffer consequences from climate change. Right? But these things are super connected. And yeah, in a nutshell, I always say, you can't have social justice, which we strive for, on a broken planet. So we need to tackle the climate challenges and the inequality challenge at the same time.
Thanks a lot. So Xavier, Rombouts, this is your turn to explain. So now you're using coffee grains. So you can maybe also explain from your point of view, from your company, how you see the situation today that is pre-COP27 period we're living, with the hopes that we still have.
Yes, just a first introduction about what we do. So Rombouts is a family company roasting coffee, and we have, yes, we are based in Belgium since fourth generation. And of course, sustainability for us is very important because we cannot imagine transfer our company to the next generation if we don't integrate sustainability. So actually, our specificity as Rombouts, we have two agronomists building direct partnership with cooperative of independent coffee farmers. And there are three objectives. The first one, when we see that a cooperative can produce a very good coffee, we start a program in order to develop the quality, to improve the productivity, and of course we want them to be Fairtrade certified. Why we do that? So for us, it's first of all to get a coffee of very good quality, because everything at Rombouts it's about quality. And then we have also a few programs combined with the Fairtrade programs. For instance, in Virunga, in the north of Congo, we have a program against deforestation. So it consists in supporting two cooperative of coffee farmers on the two sides of the park. So we can create a buffer zone around the park, because you know this park is victim of poaching and deforestation. And actually, thanks to the coffee trees and the coffee plantation, they need also other varieties of trees for shades. And so important to mix coffee trees with banana trees, advocate trees, and so on. So this way we can rebuild the forest. And at the same time, thanks to the Fairtrade program, we can give a better revenue to the local people, so they need less to go to the forest and to cut the trees or do poaching and so on. But of course, this wouldn't be possible with Fairtrade, because if you don't pay the local people with a decent revenue, there will be no sense actually. Also, yes, you mentioned a program we have in Myanmar, where it's a program consisting in replacing fields of poppy flowers. Poppy flowers, you make a drug with it, but it consists in replacing those fields of poppy flowers by a field of coffee trees, but with good quality coffee, so the local people can get a decent revenue. And so on and so on. Just to explain, yes, we have nice program to for the environment, but it has to be combined with Fairtrade. It's a very important element. Now you mentioned the COP27. If we have to rely on politics, we would have stopped decades ago. So we do on our way, and we try to do what we think good to do. And of course, we want to propose to our customer. At the same time, a new experience, thanks to different origin, new taste, but of course to make them aware that when they buy this coffee, they have an impact on what is happening in the origin country, for instance. So yes.
Thank you. Can you hear us well, just to make sure? I have to talk closer, right? So we have to make the effort to all talk closer. Thanks a lot, Paul, Xavier, for this presentation of Rombouts company. As we just saw, everything is very much interconnected, and international trade from production to consumption is clearly one of the leading contributors to climate change. And of course, it operates unfairly, as we can see, and the impacts actually of climate change fall the most onto the most vulnerable people, and they are the least responsible for it. So I'm turning to you, Sophie Aujean. You joined as a director of advocacy, Fairtrade International. How do you see this situation, how to tackle social justice while we address climate change?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the organization of this debate. I think I'm probably going to repeat what has been said, but I really think that I really believe in virtue of repetition, and really if there is one thing that I want people to take back from this discussion is indeed that smallholder farmers, especially in least developed countries, are the most affected by the climate change impacts and probably the ones who contributed the least to it. And so really, if we are serious about protecting the environment, about climate action, they need to get support. There's no other way around. And the main thing on which we need to support them is living income. That has been said actually by everyone here. For me, that's really the key, because as long as producers' cost of production are actually higher than the income they get, their priority is going to be to feed their family. And that would be the case for any of us. And looking at the environment protection and at the long-term measures that need to be taken, that's not possible in that context. So the second thing I want to say is that in Fairtrade, we have really a deep practical knowledge on the links between human rights and environmental rights. Mm-hmm. So we know what needs to happen. So what do we do in Fairtrade? We connect disadvantaged producers with consumers. We promote fair trading conditions. We empower producers, and of course we have our standards to really ensure that fair trade certified products are socially and environmentally responsible. Increasingly, and that's why I'm joining today, we're also doing advocacy, including on climate change, on building resilience, on living income, on human rights due diligence. And as you just said, all this is very much interconnected. So it's not human rights versus environment. It all goes together. And there cannot be environmental sustainability if there is no trade justice, if there is no climate justice. It all goes together. So what are we asking policymakers and businesses to do? So to policymakers, and we're going to discuss that more in details afterwards, we are asking them to adopt the right regulatory frameworks. Mm-hmm. The frameworks that protect human rights, is it still working? Yeah, mm-hmm. That protect human rights, that protect the environment, but that don't leave all the burden on smallholders, farmers and producers. What we are asking to businesses is exactly what our colleagues have just described actually. Pay fair prices and support farmers to adapt to climate change and to mitigate climate change. And I guess we will, in the discussion, go a bit more detail on all of that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I now have a microphone, so I hope it's okay. Yeah. So, what are companies doing enough? I think the answer is probably no, but what could they do more? What could be how to put pressure on companies? What way? So, Deborah, this is maybe you can give us your feeling about it, your analysis.
Okay. What we expect companies to do, like Sophie said, is to support producers. But how do you support producer when you don't know exactly what is happening? Then the issue of traceability comes in. You have to make sure and be committed that all your sourcing are being done traceably. And that is when you get to know exactly what is happening to the farmer, and then you know where to support. But of course, issues of climate change, issues of social injustice and other things has been in the system for quite some time. And so companies, if you are sourcing from producers, you have to be committed to also help producer mitigate those actions. You provide financial support, you provide the technical know-how, you provide all the necessary projects to make sure producers are out of the system, because it's a globe And just you shifting from producer to producer just because there's a risk, one producer is in a risk area, doesn't contribute anything. Because what one producer is doing in one part of the country, it's affecting the others in the other country. So we expect companies to show more commitment in supporting producers to mitigate the climate action, and also pay fair prices to producers for the produce you source from them. Because I know and I believe companies know very well that the prices given producers are not enough. So it's about time we show that commitment and then pay more to our producers. Yeah.
Thank you. How can we avoid greenwashing? Could you, I'm not talking about your company, I'm talking about companies generally speaking.
That's actually a good question, and I guess we need all of you to help with that, because it's a big PR machines that companies run. The issues in cocoa, if I can take an example, are known for more than 2 decades. All the big chocolate companies have sustainability programs. They talk about farmer welfare, well-being. I also don't want child labor. But the sad truth is that for 2 decades, the results have been virtually zero. There are still 1.5 million children working illegally.
So you're saying zero?
The results are zero. On the sector. 1.5 million children work illegally in cocoa. Not helping out your parents after school, but illegal type of work, according to the law of Ghana and the law of Ivory Coast. That's the size of the problem. There's been massive deforestation in West Africa because of, amongst others, cocoa expansion. These issues are known to the industry. And they have these sustainability programs, but the reality is they have no clue where the cocoa comes from. And all the programs together only cover a small fraction of their total sourcing and requirements. And that needs to stop. And we need consumers to be more angry about that and ask difficult questions to your favorite brands, challenge them to do more. That's the only way to really start putting more pressure on them. Next to, of course, legislation that was set. Governments have a very important role to take and legislate companies. We are lobbying with a group of chocolate companies together for stricter regulations, basically saying regulate us. And that also helps companies to compete on the same level, but not on this level here, but on this level here. And that's where we need to be.
Okay, thank you. Xavier?
Thank you. Yes, talking about the environment, there is also a huge topic in the coffee industry, it's plastic. So every big company or big retailer are bragging about sustainability policy and so on. But the coffee sector or the coffee industry is generated a lot of plastic. And I think it's the more we wait and the bigger the problem is. Also, what I think, for instance, Rombouts is the only one coffee roaster in Belgium not selling capsules. We don't believe in capsules. We think that it's insane. Even if it's the rise of the capsules, there is a demand from the customer from that. We developed. Rombouts is very known for the 1-cup filter, so the plastic 1-cup filter. Last year we launched a home compostable versions made in fibers. But of course, when you launch an innovation with less impact on the environment, it costs more than something with already existing in plastic or in aluminium. And I think it's not fair. And I think if we can expect something from the government in Belgium, for instance, I think they need to tax products with a big impact on the environment. And for instance, they need to decrease maybe the tax on coffee beans, ground coffee, traditional way of making coffee. We don't need capsule to make coffee. We don't need that. So to make good coffee, you can use beans. And I think, yes, I think they need to act there.
At which level should regulation be? Is it at the governmental level, or is it at the international level? Of course, at the EU
I think
level?
that yes, each country has to show the example. from my point of view. But, yeah. So yes, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just say one quick thing on this question on greenwashing? And I'll get back later on the details of the legislation, but just on due diligence, there will be more and more requirements on due diligence, forcing companies to look at what's happening in their supply chains. And if we want to avoid greenwashing, we need to make sure that companies really address what they find out about their supply chains, and they just don't think, okay, this is tricky, this is a tricky product, this is a tricky area, I'm just going to do something else, work with other suppliers in another region. No, if you do that, the issues are not going to be addressed. So go for it, and in partnerships with businesses, with governments, with NGOs, we can address all those human rights and environmental degradation issues. But it's really not the moment to look away. It's the moment to look at what the issues are and address them in partnerships altogether.
Can you give an example of such partnerships? Do you have a company in mind or companies? I don't know whether it's okay to mention them, but I mean, can you give us maybe an example of where it's working okay and another example where, it's going around?
That I don't know, sorry, I'm sure that other speakers here can, but yeah, okay. It's just that we have seen this type of things, and this is where we are really mindful when it comes to the, perhaps I can just go on details on one thing where there is currently, the EU is working on a due diligence directive, and we are really trying to make sure that it includes a requirement to sustain trading relationships, especially in areas where it's complicated. And perhaps one more thing I can say on this due diligence directive that the EU is working on is that we need to make sure that it also includes living income, as we were discussing, because again, this is the precondition for sustainable farming practices. So that's the two things on this directive, and we can mention other legislative files afterwards.
Okay.
But this directive on due diligence, this is going to be examined now, I mean very soon, so it's actually happening right now. So how do you see the hopes of getting the right directive, which will be efficient and will be respected afterwards by companies and making a real change? So I give you the microphone back.
Thank you, and perhaps our colleagues also can speak on this directive. So it was presented by the European Commission in February this year. It's quite a long process. There will be, it's Parliament, Commission, and Member States involved in it. And it will take a bit of time. There will be a transposition and then implementation. But in a nutshell, what we are asking is that, again, as I said, that living income is really there, that there is much more stakeholder engagement. So really, again, that the smallholder farmers are consulted, are in the driving seat on how this directive is going to be shaped and implemented. And the last point was just what I said. If you see that indeed there are issues, structural issues in your supply chains, please address them. Don't look away.
Thank you. Deborah, would you like to comment on this due diligence directive and the hope you may have from your point of view?
Yes, I think I'll go with the last one Sophie said. As I mentioned that earlier, there are issues in the supply chain, and so if a buyer sees that, don't move, work with it. But also we want regulations and policies that considers reality on the ground. How much does the regulation reflect what is happening at the producer level? Was there any engagement with producers, the local government, the CSOs that have been working with the producer for a very long time? These are the things we want to see. So if the policy or regulation comes, we want to see our picture in it. We want to see the producer's perspective in it. We want to see regulations that tackles what is happening. So I said it earlier that if you are making a policy or regulation for us, it's a good idea. But if you don't consider our thoughts, if you don't consider exactly what is happening for us, then it's just a policy you want to make and put it on the shelf. It will not have much impact as expected. So these are the things as producers we also, as we are working. So our voice needs to be heard. Our voice needs to be registered in regulations and policies. And this is what we are asking, since the regulations are not finalized, there's still time. Let's work with the local government. Let's work with CSOs working with producers. Let producers also tell their side of the story, and let's know how to align it to make sure each party benefits from this regulation.
Thank you, Deborah. Would you like to comment on the due diligence directive?
I'm not a lawmaker and not even a lobbyist, but what I can see from it, these are indeed exciting times, and the kind of law that we are advocating for is indeed getting shape right now, and it will be quite a shocker for companies if it actually gets into place, and it will be, I think, very refreshing that they will have to turn greenwashing on its head. Mm-hmm. Because these kind of regulations will require them to open up and be honest about the issues that they find, and also their attempts on solving it and how they might fail. So this is a very vulnerable position for companies to be in. They are also scared of that, and understandably. I think consumers and CSOs have to be strict and firm, but also understanding that this will be a transition. And we hope that Stone's Open Chain and also the other companies that work on our own Open Chain platform on the same principles can lead the way, that you can be transparent about the issues that we find. Also in our traceable supply chain, we do find cases of child labor. So that's not something to be proud of, but I am proud of the fact that we can find them and that we know where the issue is and that we can work with our partners, the cooperatives and the leaders in the communities and the parents to get that child out of the child labor situation as soon as possible. And that's how you tackle these problems, instead of denying them or looking away from it. Look the problem in the eye and then start solving it.
Xavier, I will let you also answer on the due diligence directive in preparation, but also would like to ask you what you think the consumers' power is really. Is it a real power? I mean, is consumers' awareness through everything we're describing and all the campaigns, from NGOs, can it make a real difference? And of course, we can imagine it's not enough, but can it force companies? Can it make a real difference in the way companies make their, examine their production and the global food system in their own production? Do you think that's something we read, that it's not going to be enough, like for climate change, that people should change their habits, but it might not be enough? What's your position on this?
No, very merely. So the customer is a decision maker actually in this story, and I think it's very important to have a transparent communication and to sensibilize him to the fact that there is a problem, but maybe let's communicate more about the alternative we can propose. And I think it's also our job to communicate about what we do, and it can be also an added value, because when you communicate about exclusive coffee coming from Laos, Myanmar, Virunga Park with a story, for us it's a benefit, it's an added value, it's not a burden, it's a very good thing actually. And now it's what we do is just communicating on our programs. And then, yes, we have to convince him, because the problem we have when we start the program with a cooperative, it's nice to start a program with a cooperative, but then we need to commit on the production of the crop, and yes, and it's important to have a long-term partnership with those cooperative and buy every year the major part of the crop. So yes, so we have to make a lot of effort, to provide a lot of effort to convince the customer to buy this coffee. So we have to be transparent. We have to show him the good impact he can have. And so on. And of course, yes, it's very important that the company itself has good conviction also, because yes, we can be very attempted to greenwashing, because our cheaper label than Fairtrade, the one with a nice frog, very good for marketing. But when you look at the content, yes, it's I think it's not that perfect. So yes, so it's rely on the choice of the company itself.
Okay.
Sophie, could you also answer the same question on the consumer's responsibility and potential power?
Thank you. Very briefly on that. I mean, that's even more relevant as a question because we know that we are going through an inflation crisis, and consumers have really a great responsibility here in handing the race to the bottom, and really making as much as possible responsible choices, because again, smallholder farmers are hit as well very much, and they have cost of production which are really increasing a lot. So this is really where consumers can play a strong role, is in keeping on to support and buying fair trade products.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. I'd like to move on now to the question of climate finance. We talk about quite big amounts of money for climate finance adaptation, but we know that less than 2% actually is currently making its way to small-scale farmers. So what do you see, what kind of change or could be made to make sure that more money of this climate finance, that's also on the eve of the COP27, that's something that's going to be discussed as well. Deborah?
Oh, thanks. I think farmers, if given the chance and financed directly, can make more impact, can make more initiative to mitigate the climate impact. And so I think it's time for these monies to be channeled directly to producers. Sometimes the long chain of finance becomes worried. So by the time it gets to farmers, it's almost not enough. So I think if you want to make real impact, then we should look at financing the producers directly, rather than financing government, financing the whole sector or something. But there's a system in place, there's certification, there's cooperative groups, and this is where cooperatives becomes very important. So there's cooperative group, finances are being channeled to this cooperative group, just like premiums are being channeled to them. And I know with the technical support from our CSOs, we have programs on agroforestry, we have forest regenerations that farmers are actively taking part of. So if these projects are being taken up and being fully financed with a climate fund, then I think producers will contribute a lot. Yeah.
I have another question on from the state's point of view and your point of view on the state's action. Do you think governments do enough to penalize companies who do not comply with climate regulations? Because we have now a number of climate regulations at the international level, but we know that companies do not comply, or not quickly enough, or through greenwashing, as we already said. But not only greenwashing, just like the nobody is actually, they're not giving any account to anyone, especially multilateral companies, big ones.
Would you like to answer this question, Sophie?
Sorry, I'm going to disturb the whole thing, but can I get back to the question on climate
Sure.
finance? Sorry.
Absolutely.
Because there was this pledge back in 2009 at the COP of 100 billion dollars of support from developed countries to developing countries so that they take climate action. And we know that we haven't delivered on that. As you said, there is only 2% going to smallholder farmers. There is also not enough focus on loss and damage. And actually what we need is not 100 billion euros. What we need now is trillions. So really, if we can make progress on the delivery of this 100 billion pledge, again, going to smallholder farmers, that's already a great progress. And perhaps another thing, so indeed there is COP in less than 1 month now. So let's involve smallholder farmers into the discussions at COP. It's wonderful that Deborah will be at COP. There is, for instance, a pavilion from the EU at COP. So please do speak about fair trade, about trade justice, and how that links up with climate justice. And perhaps, I don't know if you want to address the other question.
Sure.
Or you can repeat it, sorry.
Yeah, with the question on how to penalize, how governments can do more to penalize companies who do not comply with the climate regulation. They are numerous. So.
Yeah, I think that the first step that they have to take is translate international agreements into laws. Right, so that's what we talked about, what we lobby for. So without that, there's no basis to penalize companies. But the other side is, of course, companies shouldn't wait for legislation to be in place and a penalty to be threatening them, right? There's also, without legislation, a responsibility on companies to take action and remediate issues in their supply chain. I mean, you can't have a successful business on a destroyed planet. So it's also very short-sighted to not take action. And that is a responsibility that companies can and should take. And it's, I mean, the fact that so little of the available funds end up in smaller farmers is not a thing that, like a natural order of thing, right? These are caused by design choices that people make, which make it difficult that funds end up there. And you can do different things for that. For example, right? This is of course a very open door. Yeah, let's give more agency to smaller farmers. Let's indeed invite them on panels and listen to them. All true, and we need to do that. But it's also about thinking about how do you design your intervention, your program. For instance, in our supply chain, we work with our partner groups to map all the plantations of cocoa farmers so that we can assess against deforestation risk. This happens more in the cocoa sector, but what we do differently is that we enable cooperatives to collect that data and maintain that data. Because we believe that's not our data, it's actually data of the cocoa farmer, and the cooperative can help them manage that.
Okay.
And in that way, you give more agency in the hands and power in the hands of farmers, and with that, they not only learn where there's a risk of deforestation, but also how big their plantation is, how much input they need for improving yields, all of that, and it gives more control in a co-op to be stronger together and work collectively from their agency, and not just because some program from the north tells them what to do.
Okay, yeah. Thanks. Xavier, would like to comment as well on this?
I think everything has been said by everybody, but of course what we see the last decade and what is positive in the story is that we hear much more about climate change than before, and I think the more we speak about it, the more we work on it, and hopefully there will be a solution coming to that, but we need to change our mind, because yes, we know that the change can have an impact on cocoa, on coffee. So because yes, coffee is a natural product, And of course, we at every period of the crop, we are very nervous because we don't know what can happen. And it makes us very nervous because, yes, I can imagine. So people living without coffee, so it's now we have to do something. But I think that people are speaking more and more about it. And I think by working on it, we'll find a solution.
Thank you. To add more discussion on the way we can build a more, a better legal framework. You were mentioning, Sophie, that there is another legislative directive packet. A directive on deforestation, which is also some of you mentioned it, and it's a very important damage being done at the international level by companies which sometimes look quite okay in a country. They look like they're doing quite a fair job, and in fact some of their activities are directly fueling deforestation quite far away. So what can we hope from this directive? That's at the EU level, of course, but this will also be discussed, of course, at an international level at the COP15 on biodiversity in Montreal. And we know that the loss of biodiversity is going much faster than expected. So it's a very important issue as well. Would like to answer, Sophie?
Thank you very much. So it's actually it's a regulation on but don't worry. Yeah. So it's a regulation on deforestation-free products. And as I was saying at the beginning, what we want the EU and EU member states to do is really to adopt the right regulatory framework to combat human rights violation, to combat environmental degradation. But again, they need to do that with smallholder farmers in the driving seat. And so this regulation is going to be adopted quite soon. We are now in the process of what we call trialogue, which is basically a dialogue between the European Commission, who proposed the regulation, the European Parliament, and the Council, who are co-legislators. Initially, the regulation from the Commission wasn't at all, didn't have really in mind the situation of smallholder farmers. We have made progress on the text. We are very grateful to the European Parliament for the amendments they have brought to the regulation. And actually today we were supposed to have a great MEP, a great ally of us speaking today. So things have progressed, but there is still one thing that is really tricky in the negotiations, which is that because we want smallholder farmers to not have to bear the burden of complying with those regulations, we need support for them in a very practical manner with fair pricing mechanisms. And this is really the tricky part in the negotiations. And this is for the moment seen as something a bit like you're asking for a Christmas tree, you're asking for too much. While actually, this is the condition for this regulation to work, so it's not at all a luxury. That's, again, if we want more environmental protection in practice, if we really want to make progress there, we need to do that with farmers, and they need to get the right support. So it's not a luxury, it's a precondition for it to work.
Deborah, would you like to comment on this, on deforestation and this fair price mechanism that is probably the only condition for it to work?
Yes, I think if farmers or producers, because at some point we relate unsustainable farm practices to living income and unfair prices. Because a farmer is dependent on a very small size of farmland, and they are not getting enough. They feel the more they get more land to produce, then their incomes are becoming bigger. And so sometimes, not all the time, they encroach into the forest. Of course, if they are getting enough from that small piece, then it's also restricting their movement into encroaching areas. And then also with enough in their hands, they do more with the agroforestry system, farming system, and it's also contributing more to the forest sector. So I think fair wages, fair income, fair prices will also help the farmer also contribute more to regeneration of the forest, and then also in their own sector, in their own farm, make sure there's what we call the on-farm forest sector there.
So again, the fair prices are really the key. Xavier, you were also mentioning deforestation and the way your company is trying to tackle this problem. So what's your hope for a new regulation? What could that change practically?
Quickly.
Yes, so what is good is that a solution exists already. It's agroforestry. There is a solution existing. And I think maybe our people are not enough aware about it. No, I'm glad that a regulation would come. So I don't know the details about it, but I know that there is a project with Fairtrade about it, and there is a kind of association. But and I think it's very positive because, of course, when we know that every 2 years the equivalent of the superficie of Belgium has been deforested in the Amazon in Brazil, it's very concerning. So, but of course, I think there are solutions. Agroforestry is one solution, and I think it's something maybe we need to promote more. And yes, if there is a way that a regulation can improve or do something about it, it's a very good news, of course.
Okay, thank you. Paul, would you like to say something on deforestation?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think companies have a lot of agency actually, and like Xavier said, it's pretty well known what companies can and should do.
Yeah.
So it's time to stop talking and start doing. And it starts with working with your partners on the ground, assess the situation, help them also get a grip on the problem that you are facing, empower them. And then start working on a better tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's time to act. And as media, being part of the media, I have an extra question on the way you think media, generally speaking, are addressing climate change and the situation. I know it's quite a global question, but I'd like to ask you the question to know what you think, whether you think the media could play a better role, a more effective role in making people more aware and also governments more accountable to the situation.
Ladies first.
Yes, I think the media will play a very important role. Looking at this setting, for instance, those of you as here, we are less than 100, but it's streaming live on Facebook. Thousands of people are watching it. A lot to watch later. And I feel the media holding this at heart and then supporting farmers, bring their voice out, will reach more people, more consumers, and it will call for more action than just producers doing it. So, and this cause, media is very, very much important. And then they are a very good channel of carrying the information to consumers and to companies across here.
I mean, all of that, and adding to that, I think media have a crucial role to play in reframing the debate. Right? It's sort of stalling for decades now around, yeah, we need to do something with climate change. Well, it's also very difficult and complex, and what about the cost? And now we have inflation. I think media can rephrase the issues and make it concrete and actionable. So what is possible? What is the new norm? What should companies do instead of putting the lens on what's not happening and how big the problem is?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. So perhaps two things. I think, portray a bit more the human development side of things. So when speaking about climate change, look at what's happening for communities, especially in the least developed countries, and at the links between climate change and all human rights, the right to health, to education, to food security, etc. And perhaps indeed take a more positive approach, because I think otherwise it's very disengaging. So look at what's working. That would be useful, I think.
Yes, for me there is a very important point is that the media, you need really to tackle the greenwashing. So I take for instance, for the moment, there was, yes, a very green solution, what we call the PLA that we use for some packaging. PLA, it's a substitute of plastic, but made by based on corn actually. So and to produce 2 kilogram of to produce 1 kilogram of PLA, I need 2 kilograms of corn. So of course I prefer we use corn to feed people than to make luxury products. That's first, and also because we were interested as a coffee company, so maybe it could be the solution. But when you go deeper on that, you realize that yes, corn coming from South America is GMO. It's not GMO-free. It's very hard to find a GMO-free PLA. It say that yes, it's compostable, but it's industrial compostable, so it's very different than being home compostable. So when you look at it, it's insane. And when you look at the communication about this material, you think yes, it's a solution. And I think that the media is not just taking a news and create anxiety about it. I think it's very important that really investigation has to be done and to share that, but because we have to be also careful with the pain that the media can do on the industry. So it's very important to get the right information and to be sure about the information. That's first. And secondly, I think it's also important then when there is a news and it's sometimes like a bomb and create anxiety to the customer, and sometimes it has to happen, but also to see on each topic the evolution when it's negative, of course, but also when it's positive, to show that yes, there are also some positive things possible.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I have turned my back. There was no other way, but now I'm ready to take some questions. If you have some questions for our panelists, you're very welcome. I think there's a microphone somewhere, or maybe, yeah. I can see a few questions here and there, and up.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the great conversation. It was really very, very instructive. I have a question for Deborah. Deborah, you mentioned, and I think it was very, very interesting that you said that, nothing is going to work for farmers if you don't start by asking. The due diligence legislation has been around for quite a time. Like, we all know that the European Union is a clumsy and slow animal, and we've known about that for years. And perhaps you're not the typical example, because as a Fairtrade ambassador, you maybe know about this topic earlier. But judging by your friends or colleagues who work in cooperatives which are not necessarily Fairtrade certified, has anyone approached them, at least in the last few years, to talk about this? I don't know, the EU delegation, companies, their own ministries.
I think I may not be able to give a direct answer to that, because I've not been per my discussions with them. It has never come up that I was approached by EU or was approached by this person to talk about the regulations. So I'm sorry, I may not be able to give an answer now, but maybe later, yeah.
Okay, thank you. There was one questioner up there, and you also had one question. Right.
Thank you for the interesting conversation, in particular, Deborah, for your input. Is that close enough to my mouth? I was wondering about the ecological impact of coffee beans in cocoa beans in general. In typical statistics, like they kind of get a very bad score in terms of all kinds of planetary boundary indicators when it comes to land use change, when it comes to carbon emissions, water use, etc. But some other sources have taught me that it depends a lot on the production method. And if you use a production method that's a bit more sustainable, if you use a production method that, for instance, doesn't clear entire areas of forest just to grow cocoa beans for a few years, for instance, and to not do that in a sustainable way, that you can actually manage to reduce the impact of growing cocoa beans and coffee beans by almost an entire order of magnitude. So can you confirm that? To whoever knows best. Who wants to take it?
So I'll try, Deborah, and then when I say nonsense, then you correct me, okay? No, it's true. So a large part of the carbon footprint of a chocolate bar is actually due to cocoa production. If you take averages, the biggest contributor is actually milk powder in milk chocolate. So people tend to forget that there's actually quite a lot of milk powder in chocolate too. But for a dark chocolate bar without milk, then definitely cocoa is the largest contributor. And it has to do with the way cocoa is produced, and that cocoa plantations have been set up in the past. So there's also some history there. And what we do in our supply chain is work with farmers, educate them about shade trees, and help them and facilitate that they can plant shade trees. It has a dual effect because it actually helps improve productivity of the cocoa, because naturally cocoa is actually a shade tree, so it grows better under shade than in the direct sun, and it captures more carbon at the same time. And that's a very practical way of working with farmers and giving them the power and the agency to do their bit and help capture more carbon. And then through that we see that our total footprint actually is reduced. And as Tony's, where we can't reduce it yet, we work with Just Dig It, an organization that helps greenify dried out lands. So we capture more carbon there to offset any carbon footprint that we can't reduce directly now.
Would you like to answer as well?
Yes, why not? So we did calculate our carbon footprint. Yes, when you don't produce or make plastic capsules, a big part is the transport, because of course coffee come from coffee countries, and of course there is a transport. But yes, and we hope that in the future so we'll find more environment-friendly way to transport the coffee from the plantation to Europe, for instance. So that's a point, but then we have also to imagine if there is no coffee also, coffee, you can contribute also to rebuild some part of forest and so on. So you have also to imagine also if there is no coffee, what would be also in the place. So it's a question also, but the big problem, yes, is the transport at the moment.
Deborah, would you?
Deborah, please.
Yes, I think Paul said, but sustainable farm practices is the best, and it gives producers more yield, but it also comes with a cost. Like Paul mentioned, producers now have to divert into the agroforestry system. That is also a best practice. But getting the tree seedlings, getting climate resilient cocoa seedlings, all the fruit crops, all in one field, it comes with a cost. Mm-hmm. And so this is a cost that some farmers cannot be able to bear, and so they feel expanding their farm will be the best way of getting more crops and then getting more money. So if farmers are being paid fair wages, that is the best practices they can involve in. And of course, Fairtrade has a project on dynamic agroforestry where farmers are being supported. Each year we have our partners also supporting us, supplying the seedlings and then other tree crops to our farmers to plant on their farm. So that is our goal. That is what we are looking at. But of course, it also comes with a support from.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, Sophie, maybe?
Why not?
Very, very briefly, just on the good practices there.
Yeah.
For instance, indeed, we have in East Africa, when it comes to coffee, what we call Climate School of Leadership, where we are really supporting farmers in, we're providing training modules for them really to understand what are the climate impacts of their production, what are the environmental risks, and looking also at the solutions. So we mentioned agroforestry, agroecology, regenerative agriculture. But what needs to be clear is that it's not that there will be one solution that's going to work in all contexts. So this is where, again, we need this specific support.
Thanks a lot. There was one question. Oh, many questions. Okay. Yes, and another one after. Yeah.
Go one.
Yes.
1, 2.
I think the.
Yes. My question goes to Deborah. And over the years, there's been this worrying trend of companies coming up with their own labels. And in your own word, as you were saying, when they come out with their own labels, what they usually do is that, yeah, even though I'm not paying up to this amount of living income, I'm channeling it through other sustainability projects. And in most of these sustainability projects, the producers are not informed. These sustainability projects are crafted in a way to help meet requirements of reporting. And in your favorite quote, anything for us without us is never for us. How are you going to build the agency of producers, mobilize them to also look at the issue? Because it's a growing trend of convenient, what I call convenient sustainability labeling. With time, they try to dodge and then form their own sustainability label and come up with their own terms without involvement of producers. This is one question I would like you to, how are you going to mobilize producers along that chain? And second one to Sophie. Sophie, the media is an important actor in our fight for climate justice. However, in the producing countries, most often the discourse within the media is about the effects and not the causes. So you see them highlighting how forest has been degraded, how illegal mining has affected forested areas. But you know that globally, about 1.6 billion people live around 5 kilometers of forested areas. And 71% of them are from low and middle income countries. So when the discourse is not on the causes, as in pricing, as in inequality, but it's rather on the effect, calling on government to send military and other things to curb it, how is Fairtrade International going to change this narrative in the media? Thank you.
Okay, first to Deborah.
Yeah, thank you. So producers, I would say, are not against companies coming up with their own label. But what we expect is when you come up with a label, it should be a label that looks at a better life for a farmer. And so we do what we call partner engagement. And it's something, a procedure that we use to communicate with our partners on issues that we feel is not a certain right with producers. And so each company has their own work ethics, ways of working, of course, ticking the box because they also have to meet some regulations elsewhere. But also with the communication that we've drawn between them, that is what we use. That is the channel we use to set them down. At the end of the year, we do season assessment. So that is where we talk to them about the programs and projects that is not making much impact, those we have to improve on, and then those we have to discontinue. So that is the only channel, but I think when there are more regulations, then it also tackle issues of companies bringing up their own label that will not be supportive to farmers. Yeah.
Thank you. And Sophie?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, and I think advocacy and communication and media are very much linked indeed. And so I know that in Fairtrade International we're going to launch a video on living income, and we will also launch soon what we call a risk map on due diligence. And so I think those tools are really there to remind that, and this is what we've been discussing today, that we need to start with the root causes around living income and poverty as the root causes for environmental degradation. And this is where the work needs to happen. Perhaps the second point is around loss and damage I was referring to earlier, and the links between climate and human development. And I think indeed we need to be much stronger there. And I think there is also a link with the responsibility of developed countries as former colonizers, and the whole debate on loss and damage needs to sit into that framework.
Thank you. There was someone...
yes, just to add up to, I think in the advocacy recommendation, there was a portion on complaint mechanism for producers. And so if this is included in the regulation where producers have the channel of making complaints on programs and activities by partners that are not supporting their movement, that can also help. So we look forward for that as well.
Okay, thank you. There's also someone.
Hi, this is a question to Sophie. I'm from IFOAM Organics Europe, and I wanted to ask you as Fairtrade about some sort of situation which most farmers I know, which we also observe with organic conversion, is that with Fairtrade, Fairtrade certified farmers are often already farmers who are either in cooperative or who are linked, and we also observe in the organic sector that there's a lot of capacity building happening within the same kind of communities and networks. But I'm wondering, and this is also addressing licensing, how you are ensuring, if we are already saying farmers need to be paid a fair wage, how you are ensuring that the bar is lowered to join Fairtrade or to join the network, and not always to tap into the existing networks already, to make sure that there is a triple effect of fair pay or higher wages.
Thank you.
Maybe I can take this one. The way Fairtrade structured the minimum Fairtrade price have a premium for organic. So if you are Fairtrade certified and organic certified, then as a producer you receive an extra premium, and that's a mechanism to compensate the extra, let's say, cost of becoming organic. And there's, we are currently discussing a new policy for the Fairtrade system to embrace agroecology as a set of principles for climate adaptation mitigation, but also ensuring a fair transition to make sustainability really happen.
Maybe I wasn't entirely clear. For me, it's also about, I think, for example, if we are launching a campaign which is supposed to help capacity building for organic farmers, it's always addressing the same group of people who is already involved in networks, who are already part of existing structures. And I'm wondering how Fairtrade is ensuring that we're not always tapping into the same networks and addressing the same cooperatives and the same partners, but also making sure, for example, that farmers who are not yet of cooperatives become part of cooperatives, or that cooperatives are included which have not yet been, part of the fair trade network, in order to benefit, in order to make sure that there's this ripple effect on fair pay, and that it doesn't really stay in this already established circles.
Well, me again. Maybe a distinction that is important to make is that there's the fair trade system, is the system of all the organizations that are certified, but there's also the fair trade movement, which includes artisan and other farmers that are connected. And actually, my colleague Mikel is over there for the Fairtrade movement, and we have been building these pieces together. But the Fairtrade movement, it goes beyond just those Fairtrade organizations that are certified. We also try to engage communications with other organizations like IFOAM, the International Federation for Organic Movement, try to bring also those that are not necessarily certified Fairtrade into the table. And currently we are discussing ways where the approaches, although the certification has some sort of boundaries within the plantation, how to make sure that the cooperative, as a, let's say, local power unit, can also invite their neighbors into the process. So that type of governance capacity in the districts is something we are trying to push forward. Not always a good case, depends also on the willingness of local governments. But we are seeing that, for instance, in Ghana with the deforestation monitoring protocol. Most of fair trade producers are located in areas covered by forest, but their neighbors are full of deforestation alerts. So it's not about just the fair trade producers being compliant, but it's also about how the rest of the community works together to restore the degradation. So yeah, we are very much in favor of having more people winning the table.
Thank you. There was one person who's been asking for.
My name is Philip. I'm director of Fairtrade Belgium. I have a question to Xavier Rombouts. Before joining Fairtrade, I was working in a food retailer, very competitive. I was head of sustainability, and we had always very tough discussions with the buyers on prices. Sustainable or non-sustainable because of the price. So I'm just wondering, how tough was it in your company to decide to move to Fairtrade and accept to have an ingredient which is more expensive, where there is a premium, where there is also a licensing fee? And in the future, how tough will it be in your company to go one step further, to go to living income throughout the whole coffee supply chain? Because we heard living income is the cornerstone of the whole discussion. How much buy-in do you have at the level of your board of directors? I mean, you're the CEO. How much do you see buy-in to move really towards full living income coffee? Thank you.
Yes, you're right. So selling products to the retailer as a challenger, it's very tough. You're right. The one thing is that we don't sell only coffee to retail. Yes, of course, otherwise it would be maybe complicated. But we find a very good audience, for instance, so in the what we call the B2B. All the yes, the how do we call it, les communes, the Humanton, is yes, the cities. Some company have a sustainability department, so to comply they need to source fair trade coffee. So it helps for us a lot to find to sell our fair trade certified coffee. But yes, with to find a good fair trade concept, it's very tough. Actually, if the customer demands the product, there is no issue with the retailer. So we first need to convince the customer. Then once you have the product in place, it's easier, of course. But it's not. I don't mind to convince the retailer. Actually, I have to convince the customer. I think the toughest challenge.
Yeah. Paul would like to answer quickly as well.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I mean this is often in part of the debate, right? Seems like a dilemma. Like, do we want to have a competitive price or do we want to be sustainable? But it's a false dilemma because there's no choice. We can only have sustainable and fair products on shelf in the end if you want to have a system that sustains everybody on this planet and also preserves the planet. And it's fascinating to see how advanced we are in discussing the sense at the end of the supply chain. But if you look at, I don't know for coffee, but if you look at an average chocolate bar, about 5 or 7% for a dark chocolate bar of the retail price ends up in the farmer's pocket with the current super low cocoa prices. Now, if you would pay a living income price for cocoa, that means in our case we pay around 80% on top of that normal price. That would add just a few percent to the total cost of a chocolate bar. Right? It's literally a few cents for a chocolate bar. Now I know that in this time of inflation and especially families that struggle to pay their gas bill, every cent counts, right? But if you look at it from the bigger picture, this is really a problem that we can solve. It's about readjusting a little bit of the extreme profits that are made at the end of the supply chain to the beginning of the supply chain. And it can even be done within the current pricing of chocolate.
Okay. So we have one last question.
Thank you very much. So we are seeing that there are more and more requirements put on companies to respect human rights and the environment, deforestation, etc. That should be good news for small farmers, I guess, but it can also, if it's done in a bad way, translate into extra burden, right? And so I'm asking myself, will living income, higher prices be sufficient? Because we're not only talking about expenses, we're also talking about investments. And is there sufficient funding? Is there sufficient finance? Are there programs to help farmers to invest? So it goes beyond actually living costs and your daily expenses, because you need to do investments, which is a good thing. You can become more productive. But I just wonder if there is sufficient sources of funding, finance. I think I know the answer on that already, but do you see this?
Yes, I think living income alone, it's not the answer. But of course, we have companies supporting farmers invest in other income-generating activities. So that is also another add-up to. But of course, the reason we throw more light on living income is that is their work. Whether the living income will solve their problems totally or not, they have to be paid fairly for the efforts they put in that work. And so once that is set, then we can also look at the other approach to make sure holistically a farmer is living well. So that is why I feel for our side, we put so much focus. We just want to feel that our work is paying us what it's supposed to pay. But of course, living income also gives us a responsibility as producers. We also have to look at other sources of income. We also have to look at our expenses. So we don't do outrageous expenses and expect to get more money to fill that gap. But a standard of living that is good for us, we make sure we live by that. And then also we make sure we are producing enough, producing quality beans. We are adhering to other regulations on human rights. We are adhering to other regulations on deforestation and other things. And then we can also get our living income as well.
Thanks a lot, Deborah. Okay, so that'd be almost the last word, but.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing on this question, is that in Fairtrade we have the minimal price, but we have also the premium that can be used actually to invest into the farms, for instance. And also we're trying increasingly to support diversification of livelihoods and also trying to add value to the product and also to, in terms of access to markets, trying to explore opportunities with e-commerce, things like this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we don't have time for more questions, but I think you've given us a lot of insights from all your different points of view. You wanted to say something? Okay, so that's the last word. You have the last word.
Me? Then before I give it to you, because you can have the last word. So, thanks for organizing and having a very lively debate. Thanks for your attention here and also the viewers there. For the ones that are here, there's a little surprise because we talked about consumers and their agency. You have a lot of power in your hand, but sometimes it feels like you're empty-handed. So before you go out, make sure to take one of our chocolate bars so you feel connected to the solutions to some of the issues that we talked about.
Okay.
Yes, I feel very happy today because I'm always glad to be about this topic. And what I like in this project is that we create a link between the farmer and the customer. Because at the end, it's the customer who decides. So the main players, the farmers, the company believing in the project, and then convincing the customer, so the customer making the decision. Because if every customer is convinced, I think we can maybe make fair trade growth in the future.
Okay.
Okay, a very big thank you to all of you for a very interesting debate. And thank you for everybody who watched us and listened to us from far. Thank you for Fairtrade International for having organized this panel. And thank you for your attention. So, thank you.